The first thing I remember is not the funeral. It is the little blue thread hanging from the cuff of Esther's winter dress 3 weeks before she died. She was sitting at the kitchen table with both hands around a cup that had already gone cold, and that thread kept moving whenever her thumb rubbed the edge of the cup. I had seen that dress for nearly 20 years. I had mended the hook at the collar once with a pair of pliers because I could not find the right needle, but I had never noticed that blue thread before. That afternoon, she told me something I did not want to hear about one of our children. I told her she was worrying over nothing. 3 weeks later, I stood beside her grave with frozen ground under my boots, and I buried more than my wife that day. I buried her warning, too. My name is Malin. I have been Amish all my life, and I have worked the same ground long enough to know that most trouble does not arrive with thunder. Usually it comes quietly, and by the time you hear it, it has already been in the house a while. I am a grandfather now. My children have children of their own, and some of those grandchildren are old enough to think they understand their parents. That makes me smile a little. I used to think the same thing. If you have ever had somebody you loved warn you about something you did not want to believe, I would like to know whether you listened. I did not. This happened in the winter after our 46th wedding anniversary. Esther had been weaker that year, nothing dramatic at first. She tired sooner after supper. She stopped carrying the laundry basket all the way from the line and left it on the porch for me. She sat down more often while peeling apples. When you have lived beside someone for nearly half a century, you notice the small changes before anyone else does, even when you pretend you do not. I had spent most of my life measuring days by work, morning milking, fence repair, hay, planting, harvest. The same things came around again, and because they came around again, you could fool yourself into believing people would too. Esther had never seemed like a person who could disappear. She was simply part of the house, part of the kitchen in the morning, part of the garden in summer, part of the sound of cloth being folded in the evening. I knew, of course, that every life ends. A man can read that in Scripture and stand beside enough graves to understand the words. Understanding the words is not the same as believing they apply to your own kitchen table. We had 4 grown children, 2 sons and 2 daughters. Jacob was our second son. He had always been the child who could make a hard thing look easy. He had a way of making hard things look easy, and I admired that in him. Later I learned that a gift like that can become dangerous if there is not enough truth underneath it. Jacob had struggled with money for years. Not poverty exactly, there is a difference. Poverty is having too little. Jacob's trouble was always wanting the next thing before the last thing had been paid for. A better team, a larger piece of ground, new equipment when old equipment could still be repaired. He was not a lazy man. That made it harder to see. A lazy man leaves evidence everywhere. Jacob worked from before daylight until dark, and because he worked hard, I kept telling myself the numbers would eventually catch up with his effort. Esther did not believe that. She had always understood money better than I did. I knew what a cow was worth and what timber might bring. Esther knew where every dollar had gone in a month without looking at a paper. She knew which child had borrowed $5 10 years earlier and which one had paid it back before being asked. She never used that knowledge to shame anybody. She simply remembered. That winter, Jacob had started coming by more often. Sometimes he came for coffee. Sometimes he wanted to ask about a boundary line or a piece of machinery. Sometimes he said he was only passing. I liked having him there. A father does not become too old to enjoy hearing his son's boots on the porch. Esther would set out a cup, but I began to notice she watched him differently, not coldly. Esther was never cold with our children, more carefully. One afternoon after Jacob left, she asked whether I had signed anything for him. I told her no. She asked whether he had mentioned the North Field. I said he had asked what I planned to do with it someday. That was not an unusual question. The North Field was our best ground, 31 acres, dark soil, gentle slope, good drainage. My father had helped me clear the last stone line there when I was 19. Every child of ours had picked rocks in that field. Every one of them had complained about it. I assumed one of the boys would farm it after I was gone. Esther asked me again whether Jacob had put any paper in front of me. I became irritated, not because she was accusing me of anything, because I knew what she was really asking. She was asking whether I trusted our son enough to sign without reading, and the answer at that time was yes. A few days later, she was at the kitchen table in that winter dress with the loose blue thread. Snow had crusted against the bottom of the window. The stove was giving off that dry heat that makes an old house smell faintly of iron and dust. I was sorting seed catalog pages, even though planting was months away. Esther had a small brown envelope beside her cup. She did not slide it toward me. She only rested 2 fingers on it. Then she said the one sentence I still hear more clearly than almost anything else she ever said to me. Malin, when I am gone, do not sign anything Jacob brings you until Ruth has looked at it. That was all, one sentence. She did not accuse him of stealing. She did not say he was wicked. She did not ask me to choose between her and our son. She only asked me not to sign. I remember looking at that envelope and feeling something rise in me that I am ashamed of now. Pride, mostly. A little anger. Maybe fear underneath both. I told her Jacob was my son and that if he needed help he would ask me plainly. I told her I had known him since the day he was born. That was one of the foolishest things I have ever said. Parents say it often, I know my child. What we usually mean is that we know the child who once slept in the room down the hall. We know the boy who scraped his knee. We know the girl who cried when the calf died. We forget that children become adults in rooms we are not standing in. They carry worries they do not bring home. They make decisions we never see being made. Esther listened while I defended him. She did not argue. That was worse. She put the envelope in the drawer beneath the flour towels and went back to her tea. 3 weeks later, she was gone. The doctor had already told us her heart was not strong, but there is no sentence that prepares a man for an empty side of the bed. The morning after the funeral, I woke before daylight and reached toward her without thinking. My hand touched cold cloth. For several weeks the house was full of people, food, and help, yet every room seemed to contain one missing person. I handled grief by keeping my hands busy. I sharpened tools, fixed gates, and found chores nobody had asked me to do. The brown envelope stayed in the drawer. I knew it was there. I did not open it. That is the part people have trouble understanding when I tell this story. Why would a man leave an envelope untouched after his wife had warned him? I have asked myself that many times. The answer is not that I forgot. I remembered it every time I opened that drawer. I think I was afraid that opening it would make Esther right about 2 things at once. It would mean she was right about Jacob, and it would mean she had known she was going to leave me sooner than I was willing to know. So I left it there. That spring, Jacob came with papers. He did not arrive secretly. He came in daylight, put his hat on the peg, sat at the kitchen table, and explained that he had an opportunity to buy 40 acres adjoining his place. He said the seller needed an answer quickly. He had most of what he needed, but a private lender wanted additional security. He asked whether I would allow the North Field to stand behind the loan for a limited time. He spoke carefully. He had figures written out. He said the risk was small. The new acreage would increase his income. Once the first note was paid down, the North Field would be released. I could hear Esther's sentence while he talked. I could almost see the blue thread on her cuff. But grief does strange things to judgment. I wanted to be generous because she was gone. I wanted my family to feel held together. Jacob needed something from me, and saying yes felt like being a father again instead of a widower sitting alone at a table built for two. So I signed. I did not ask Ruth to look at the papers. I did not open Esther's envelope. I signed. For almost a year, nothing happened. Jacob bought the land. He planted it. He thanked me more than once. When I saw the fields that summer, I told myself Esther had worried because she had been ill. I even felt guilty for thinking that, but I thought it. The new ground looked good. Corn does not tell you whether the man who planted it can pay his debts. A green field can hide a great deal. The first sign came in late winter. A man I knew slightly stopped by the farm and asked whether Jacob had spoken with me about extending the note. I did not know what note he meant. The conversation was short. He saw from my face that I had not been told, and he became careful. That evening I went through the copy of the papers Jacob had left me. I read them slowly, then I read them again. What I had signed was not exactly what I remembered him explaining. The North Field was not simply temporary security for one purchase. The wording allowed it to secure additional obligations tied to the same lender. I had put 31 acres of my best ground behind debts I did not know existed. I felt sick, but I still defended him in my own mind. There had to be an explanation. Maybe I had misunderstood. Maybe the lender had used standard language. Maybe Jacob had intended to tell me and had been ashamed. Pride is creative when it is protecting someone we love. It can build a whole shelter out of maybe. I did not confront Jacob that night. I wish I could tell you I did. Instead, I put the papers in a box and waited. By spring, Samuel knew something was wrong. Ruth knew too. Adult children notice when their father starts asking strange questions about land records. I tried to keep the matter quiet because I believed quiet meant contained. It does not. Quiet can also mean something is growing without light on it. The truth came out on a Saturday in May. Ruth and Leah were helping me go through Esther's sewing things and kitchen drawers. It had been more than a year, and I had left much of the house exactly as she had kept it. A spool of black thread still sat near the window. Her apron hooks were still on the wall. There were dried beans in a jar she had labeled in her small handwriting. I was outside when they found the brown envelope. I came in because Ruth had sent one of the grandchildren to fetch me. The envelope was open on the table. I knew it before I was close enough to read anything. My stomach went tight in the same way it had the day the lender spoke to me. Inside were copies of 3 notes Jacob had signed over a period of several years. There was also a page in Esther's handwriting. She had kept dates, amounts, names, not rumors, not suspicions. She had known because Jacob had come to her before he came to me. He had borrowed from the household savings more than once. At first he repaid her. Later the amounts grew, and eventually he asked for her signature on something tied to the farm. She refused. Jacob begged for time to set things right, and Esther gave it to him. As her health worsened, she realized she might not be there to stop the next paper from reaching me. The final page was not dramatic. That was Esther. Even her fear was organized. She had written down what she knew, placed it in an envelope, and told me to let Ruth read anything Jacob brought. Ruth had worked for years helping her husband's business keep accounts. Esther trusted her eyes with numbers. She had built a small bridge for me to walk across after she was gone. I had stepped around it. My children stood in that kitchen and understood before I said anything that I had already signed. I saw it happen on their faces. Samuel looked toward the window. Leah sat down. Ruth put both hands flat on the table. No one shouted. I almost wish they had. Anger would have been easier than the silence. I told them what I had done. I showed them the papers. Over the next weeks, we learned the full amount of Jacob's debt. It was larger than any of us had known. He had borrowed against equipment. He had borrowed privately. He had delayed payments to 2 people in the community. He had not set out to ruin anyone. I believe that even now. He had kept believing the next harvest, the next sale, the next piece of land would solve what the last decision had created. Each time he fell behind, he made a larger promise. By the time he came to me, he was not asking for help with one opportunity. He was trying to keep several old promises from collapsing at once. That does not excuse deception, but age has taught me that understanding a wrong and excusing it are not the same thing. We did not lose the whole farm. I am grateful for that. We sold the north field. The best ground I ever worked left our family because I signed my name without asking the question my wife had begged me to ask. Part of the sale covered the obligation attached to my land. Jacob sold the 40 acres he had bought and most of his newer equipment. Samuel helped him arrange work for a time. Ruth went through every account with him. There were hard months. There were people he had to face. Some trusted him again eventually, some did not. Those are consequences a father cannot pay for his son. I could pay money. I could not restore another man's trust on Jacob's behalf. What troubled me most was not the field. Land matters, but it is still land. I had buried parents. I had buried friends. I had buried Esther. By then I knew the difference between losing something valuable and losing something irreplaceable. The north field was valuable. Esther was irreplaceable. What troubled me was that she had seen clearly at the end, and I had treated her clarity like fear. For months after the field was sold, I would walk to the old fence line out of habit. The stones were still there. A wild cherry tree grew near the corner where my father and I had once stopped for water. The new owner did not remove it. I was thankful for that. I would stand there and think about all the years Esther had walked beside me without needing to be the loudest voice in the room. She had warned me about calves getting sick before I noticed. She had known when one of the children was hiding pain. She had known when I was working because work needed doing, and when I was working because I was avoiding something. After 46 years, she knew the shape of my pride better than I did. That was what her warning had really been about. Not Jacob, me. She knew that if our son came to me ashamed and desperate, I would hear only the part where he needed his father. I would want to fix it quickly. I would confuse love with rescue. She was trying to slow my hand down long enough for truth to catch up. I used to think a good father was the man who could provide an answer, a roof, a field, a loan, a place to come home. Those things matter. But sometimes the most loving thing a father can give an adult child is a question he does not want to answer. How much do you owe? Who else have you asked? What happens if this fails? What are you not telling me? I did not ask those questions because they felt unkind. In the end, avoiding them cost all of us more. Jacob and I still speak. That surprises some people when they hear the story. They expect a family truth to end with a door closing forever. Life is usually longer and less tidy than that. He carried shame for what he did. I carried shame for what I refused to see. We could either spend the rest of our years deciding which man's failure was larger, or we could tell the truth about both of them. We chose the second. It took time. Trust comes back differently than it first arrives. The first time it is often given freely. The second time it returns in small pieces. A kept promise, a bill paid when it was due, a difficult thing admitted before anyone has to discover it. I watched Jacob rebuild his life that way, not quickly, but honestly. Finding Esther's envelope changed the way our children saw their mother. They had always known her as the quiet, steady one. Now they understood how much of the family's structure she had been carrying without anyone noticing. She saw danger early, gave Jacob time without hiding the truth forever, and left a record when she knew her own time might be short. I wish I had opened it while she was alive. That is the part I cannot repair. I could have sat across from her at the kitchen table and told her she was right to be concerned. I could have thanked her for seeing what I did not. I could have faced the trouble with her beside me. Instead, I waited until my children opened the envelope and handed me the truth in my wife's handwriting. There are regrets that come from doing cruel things. There are other regrets that come from being too certain you are a good man to notice where you are being foolish. Those are quieter. They can follow you a long time. I kept one thing from the north field after it was sold, not soil, not a fence post, a small flat stone from the old line near the cherry tree. It sits on the shelf above my workbench. Nobody would know why it is there unless I told them. Every now and then I pick it up. It reminds me of Esther, but not because she loved that field. It reminds me that love is not proved by how quickly you say yes. Sometimes love is the person who knows you well enough to ask you to stop before you make a mistake and trust you enough to believe you will listen. I did not listen soon enough. My children did. In the end, that saved more than the truth. It saved what was still possible between us. After all these years, I think that is what I learned. When someone who has walked beside you for decades says quietly that something is wrong, do not measure the warning by how much you want it to be false. Sit with it. Ask the next question. Read the paper. Pride can make a man feel loyal while he is actually refusing to see. Truth is not always the enemy of love. Very often, it is the thing that keeps love from becoming blind. If you have someone in your life who has earned the right to warn you, listen while you still have the chance to ask them why. And if stories from a long Amish life mean something to you, you are welcome to subscribe and sit with me again. I would also like to know this. Has someone you loved ever warned you about something you did not understand until much later? Some lessons arrive on time. Others wait in a drawer until we are finally ready to read them.